All right, I'm also interested as we get ready to begin tonight. Did anybody have an opportunity last week when you went home to talk to your teenagers about what of the following was most important to them? Did anybody get a chance to talk to your kids at all about that? Yeah, what's that? Yeah, I know, conversation. Anybody get a chance to do that with their kids at all? Did any of them share any helpful information with you? Parents who don't control them? Okay. 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 But that was definitely one of them. Okay. So both of them, that was very high on theirs. Parents who concentrate on good points instead of weaknesses. Okay? Anybody else have an opportunity or their kids said, hey, this was high for us? If you didn't have an opportunity to do this, again, you can do this with your kids, grandkids. It's just helpful to be able to, I think, know from our kids what it is that they're looking for. Not that we have to ask our kids, hey, tell me what you want out of me, because everything you want out of me, I'm going to do. I'm not saying that. But I do think it's helpful to be able to have conversations and to talk through these sorts of things so that we can empathize. We talked a little bit about empathy last week, being able to understand where our kids are coming from. So I really do think that's important to continue to have these conversations. So we're going to talk tonight, and I think it's page 8 in your books. That's where we're going to start tonight. We're going to really talk about boundaries and discipline this evening. And again, for some of you who, growing up, how many of you would say that your home growing up, there was a lot of rules for you growing up? Anybody would say, you know what, in my home, I feel like there was a lot of rules, a lot of expectations. Anybody feel like that was your home, lots of rules, lots of expectations? How many did any of you have an experience on the other end where it was kind of like really not a lot of structure, not a lot of rules, not a lot of expectation? Okay, you had that. And most of you somewhere in between that? Okay. I grew up in a home with I felt like a lot of rules. And I shared with some of you the reason for that, and I'll talk a little bit more about it tonight. But my mother, again, grew up in a home where there was a lot of chaos and a lot of disorder and a lot of where she was not protected. So in an effort to kind of not make sure what happened to us didn't happen to her, there were a lot of rules. She created a lot of structure. She wanted us to not have to feel chaotic like she felt chaotic growing up. So we did have a lot of rules. I mean, some of you guys might think this is not that crazy, but whenever I talked on the phone, the maximum amount of time I was ever allowed to talk on a phone, even through high school, to a girl was like 15 minutes, because mom said anything past 15 minutes, you can't have anything useful or helpful to say after 15 minutes of a phone conversations. So that was like the limit that I was ever allowed to talk to a girl. On a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday when I was dating, I could only be with my girlfriend one out of those 3 nights, okay? So the other 2, I would just have to do something else, but I can only be with her 1 out of the 3 nights. Even my senior year of high school, I remember curfew. For me, at my curfew, my senior year was like 11 o'clock, which some of you guys are like, wow, that's really late your senior year. But for me, that was like the earliest of any of my friends, 11 o'clock. And I remember my senior year, junior, senior banquet. And I'm out with my girlfriend, just the 2 of us. And mom tells me that night, hey, you need to be back at 11 o'clock. Well, my girlfriend's like, my curfew is like, she was saying it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and most of my friends was the same. But I didn't have a lot of say in that sort of thing. So because I was a little bit embarrassed that my curfew was so early, I developed a mysterious stomach illness where I was just feeling terrible. And I had to go home at 11 o'clock, like 10:30, 11, because I was too embarrassed to say this was my curfew. So I just told her I wasn't feeling well, and I kind of took her home early. So I feel like for me, and again, if you ask my parents, well, you can't ask my dad because he's not around anymore, but if you ask my mom, she'd probably tell you she didn't think there were that many rules, but I felt like for me there was a lot of that. But the reality is, no matter where you're at here tonight, you guys are going to face a lot of situations with your teenagers that are very, very difficult, okay? I have some listed here. Some of you guys are going to read through this list, and you're going to be like, yep, 7 of these, 8 of these, 9 of these, I'm experiencing this. But we all face different challenges, and even really good parents have teens that make really, really bad choices. So if you're a parent here and you feel like, you know what, we're doing our best to kind of bring our kids up in the Lord. We ask them to go to church. We talk about God in our house. We even play Christian music in our home sometimes. We do all of these things, and still it feels like our kids make poor decisions. And so you need to understand that really good parents have teens that do make bad choices. Some of us have kids that have a disrespectful attitude towards us or towards other family members or other people. Some of our teens challenge requests or rules. Some are self-absorbed and unable to see things from anyone else's perspective. And again, as you go through this list, you're probably thinking, yeah, this is one of this kids does this, one of this kids does this. Lazy and careless about responsibilities, has a negative attitude towards life, school, or other people. Some of our kids are emotionally withdrawn and distant from us. Some have a tendency to pick friends of whom you disapprove. This could be just girlfriends, boyfriends, or opposite sex. Some of them erupt in anger that sometimes seems to come out of nowhere. Some of our kids lack motivation for school and fail to maintain grades. Some of them neglect home chores and responsibilities. Some have mood shifts that seem to have no rhyme or no reason. And again, as we're discussing some of those things, for those of you guys who weren't here last week, we talked about some of the brain development and reasons why our kids do this. But remember, kids have a ton of hormones going through their body. There's peer pressure. There's brains that isn't fully developed. Everything is changing in their life. They have access to social media, illegal substances. All of that is there. So all of those things contribute to some of this as well. They're mean to their siblings or mean to their friends. Some of our teens lack interest in spiritual matters. Some of them detach from family events and want to be with friends only. Some lie and are deceptive about activities. Some are physically aggressive and violent. Some deal with substance abuse, and some of them are engaging in sexual activity. So again, as you kind of go through this list, each one of our kids that we have, we may have experienced some of these with them. And this is all rebellion, okay? It's all rebellion. Now, there are greater consequences for some of these things. Like, you know, if our kid, let's just say they neglect cleaning their room. You know, they just never clean their room, and their room is just a total mess. Like, that's feels a little less consequential than if one of our teens is engaging in sexual activity, right? Some of us would be okay, you know what, they have some mood swings sometimes, but at least they're not lying and deceptive about things. They're usually pretty open and they're pretty honest. So some of these are more consequential in regards to the effects, but all of us have kids that in some ways are challenging us, and we're dealing with all of these things. And tonight I want to kind of give you the basis of what I think is the reason why our teens do what they do, and it goes all the way back to the beginning in Genesis. I mean, you guys are familiar with this scripture where it says in Genesis 1:26, then God said, he's created everything else. God created everything else, created the plants, he's created the animals, he's created the sun and the moon and the stars. He looks at all of it, he's like, this is good. Like, I'm happy with what I created. And then he decides he's going to make mankind. And he says, let us make them in our image and our likeness so that they can rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So when God created mankind, he looked at it and he said, it's the first time he actually said, this is very good. This is very good what I've done. He was very, very proud. But then God made a decision after that to take man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. And then he commanded the man, you are free. You are free to eat from any tree in the garden. All right, that's only part of it. I'll get to the next part here. But he looks at what he created and he's like, you have freedom. I've created all of this, and you are free to have everything that I've created is yours. Free access, it's all good. But you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. So he's like, I've created all of these things. All of these things are good, but there's this one thing that you are supposed to stay away from, and I'm not telling you to stay away from it just to be a killjoy or to be a mean parent or a mean father. Like, I'm asking you to stay away from it because I know that it's not best for you. And so I'm encouraging you to stay away from it. So it's really the two trees in the garden. We've got these things that I've given you that are good. As parents, we want to give our kids responsibility. We want to give our kids freedom, right? We want to give them things and say, all of this is for you. But there are some things that we're not going to be okay with because I know that in the end, this is not going to be best for you. I know that if you do this, there are going to be consequences that are going to be bad consequences that could last for a long time. So God chose to give us and chose to give our teens, the term is agency, free will to make choices and to make decisions, okay? So your teenager has the ability to choose smart or stupid. They have that ability. Because of free will, our teenagers have the ability to choose smart and stupid. And when your teenager chooses smart, he or she will reap the rewards of those smart choices, right? We see it in school, studying hard, working hard in school. In the end, if they continue to do that, there's a possibility they may go on to college, may get into a career, they may really do well for themselves. They have that opportunity. When their teenager chooses stupid, he or she is going to experience, like God said in the garden, remember, when you eat from it, you will certainly die. They're going to experience pain in some of the choices that they make. And while you can't make your teenager turn out right, it's your job as parents, it's my job as a parent, to reward smart choices and to penalize stupid ones. So when raising teenagers, I want to encourage you, there are some things that you have. I'm going forward on my computer. I need to go forward on yours as well. There are some things that we as parents can control. And there are some things that you as a parent cannot control. There are some things that you are responsible for, and there are some things that you are not responsible for. So I want to tell you this because I really kind of want to take the pressure off us a little bit. Like when it comes to things that I can control as a parent, all of you here, you can set expectations. You have the right to do that as a parent. I can set expectations. I can say, this is what I expect out of you. This is the behavior that we are expecting or that we are looking for. You can actually help them meet those expectations by having conversations. And when things aren't going well, you kind of communicate with them why it's not going well. You're opening up conversation. You're having those conversations on a regular basis. You can help them meet those expectations. You can set consequences. If this happens, then this is going to take place. If you choose to not clean your room for like 8 weeks straight, and we leave you alone because we want to give you freedom, and it's your room, so we're not going to get too much in your world. But if we have to get an exterminator to come into our house, right, and we're paying an exterminator because there's bugs all over the place, you're going to pay that bill, okay? I'm giving you freedom. I'm letting you make a choice, but you have to understand that some of our choices have consequences. So you can set some of those consequences. We're going to talk about that tonight. And this is the main thing that I think as parents we can control. You can control your actions, how you react in front of your kids, how you get along as mom and dad, whether you choose to ask forgiveness, whether you treat your kids terribly or good. You can control your own actions. You can control your own thoughts. You can control your own beliefs. And you can control your own feelings. That's what we have control over, our thoughts, actions, beliefs, and feelings. So those are some things that you can control. Here's some things that you cannot control. You can't control your child's actions. You can't control your child's thoughts. You can't control your child's beliefs, and you can't control your child's feelings. I wish sometimes this were the case. I wish I could make my kids choose smart. I wish that I could make my kids' attitudes be good all the time, that they just have joy on their faces, that when dad decides to make a rule, they're like, you know what, that's a good rule. That's actually really probably best for my life now that I think about it. I would love that if that were the case. The reality is that's not going to happen for us very often. And you need to understand you're not in control of those things. In some ways, it should take the pressure off of you, but in a minute, I'm going to have you fill out a little sheet for us control freaks. That's going to be difficult for us, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about control freaks in a minute, all right? What are you responsible for as a parent? What are you responsible for? You're responsible to make tough decisions that aren't popular. As parents, we sometimes have to go to our kids and say, I know that what I'm asking you to do is not going to be your favorite thing to do. I know that all of your friends that you hang out with probably don't have the same expectations that we have on you. I'm going to make some decisions that aren't going to be popular with you, but trust me, I'm really trying to do this in your best interest. They'll say, whatever. They may not believe you, but you have to make decisions that aren't popular sometimes. You really do. You have to teach your child to function independently. That's what we talked about. The goal of parenting teenagers is to get them to a point where when they're 18 years old, 19 years old, they're actually functioning totally independent from you. As much as we may not like that, that's our goal. Holding your child accountable, you're responsible for holding your child accountable for their behavior. You're responsible for doing the best job you can as a parent. And sometimes we fail, and sometimes we fall short, but all you can do is the best that you can do. You can influence, you can teach, you can mentor, you can correct, you can discipline, and you can make stupid choices, ouch, a little bit, okay? Those are all of the things that you are responsible for. And what you are not responsible for is simple. You're not responsible for making sure your kids are always happy, okay? You can take that responsibility away. I don't have to make sure that my kids are happy all of the time. I don't have to get the approval of others. Not every other parent around me has to think I'm doing the greatest job. My job is not to get the approval of everyone else. It's to honor God in the way that I parent my kids. You're not responsible for controlling your children. In some ways, the rules and the structure that you put in place will help with that. But if they're out of control and choose not to listen and choose to go another direction, you're not responsible for that. You're not responsible for doing for your children what they're capable of doing for themselves. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about helicopter parents, which when I created this booklet, I came up with 4 different parenting styles, and I added a 5th. And the helicopter parents is one of those, which helicopter parents believe they've got to know everything that's going on in their kid's life, because if I know everything and I'm aware of it all the time, then maybe they'll never make a mistake if I can just stay in their life enough. The reality is you can't do for your children what they should be doing for themselves. And you can't make your teenager turn out right or choose for them. So again, I don't know if this helps you. I don't know if this helps some of you, the fact that you're not responsible for these things or not in control of these things, or hurts you or helps you, but that is the reality. I'm going to get to rebellion in a minute. I do want to kind of talk about this, though. I believe that as parents, we want to trade control for influence. Trade control for influence. I want to be able to have influence in my kids' lives, and I'm going to have to sometimes trade control and being in charge of everything. I'm going to have to trade that in for influence, because some of the choices that I want my kids to make as a parent, they're going to choose not to make. Some of our kids are going to have to disown their parents' faith for their faith to become their own. It's why some of our kids in those high school years, they're like, man, I know we've been going to church all our lives, but I don't really enjoy this anymore. I don't really feel like I want to be a part of the church anymore. And we can have conversations with them about why that might be. But our kids are constantly, they're wanting to have their will, they're wanting to have their way. And so remember what you are responsible for and what you are not responsible for. You have in your book a control freak quiz. Do you guys see where that's at? I think it's the next page. I would love for you guys I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes. And I would love for you to go through these 10 little factors, and I want us to see how many of us are control freaks, how many of us sometimes have control issues. Some of us, we're more you can live and let live, and others of us, I'm wondering if you're being honest, obviously, if you're a low score. But go ahead and use a 1 if rarely is the, do you help other people drive, tell them what route to take, when to turn, where to park, remind them the traffic light has changed. Okay, 1 is rarely or never, 2 is seldom, 3 is sometimes, 4 is often, and 5 is very often. So give yourself a score on the side of each of those, and we're going to see kind of who the control freaks are and those of us who maybe aren't so much that. But go ahead and just do that for the next minute or two. How do we do? Do we have any control freaks in here at all? Not some of you not too bad with that? Anybody pretty high? A few of you? Okay. I know that I'm pretty high with this. And I think as parents, one of the things that create issues sometimes with our kids is that we do kind of like to be in control. We do kind of think our way is the best way. We do kind of want to help them out. You know, it's like, I'm just giving you this advice because it's going to be helpful for you. But really, a lot of times the reason we do that is because we're somewhat, whether it's cognitively or unconsciously, I'm worried about how my kids might turn out because how that might reflect upon me sometimes. If I'm going to be honest about it, I don't want my kids to turn out a certain way because if they live this way in their life, well, that's what a jester does, right? And that's my name that's being passed down. So I can struggle sometimes with the idea of control. And it can be dangerous to be a control freak with our kids. I think control freaks exhaust their children sometimes with there's so many expectations. I remember I told you I have a lot of expectations, but we have so many expectations on our kids that it just exhausts them. Like they feel like they just can't ever get it right. Sometimes when we are control freaks, there's not natural consequences for our kids because we're kind of controlling the environment and everything, so they don't have to sometimes deal with consequences. Creativity can be discouraged. If your way is the only way and your way is the right way, it can kind of discourage creativity with your kids or thinking through and processing. I think sometimes when our kids have control freak parents, they get anxious, okay, because I think nervous parents have nervous kids or anxious parents have anxious kids, so they'll pick up on our anxiety and it kind of makes them anxious. Kids fear making mistakes, and I think that this isn't always a good thing either, because our kids will start thinking that actually making mistakes is a bad thing rather than a teaching tool, that you can actually learn from failure. They're afraid to make a mistake because if they make a mistake, they've failed. And so sometimes when we just are control freaks in this way, these things can happen. It can even lead to some mental health problems may increase because it can cause depression, it can cause anxiety. Just the more and more that there's all of these expectations that we have, and if it's not right, then we need to do better and we need to do better. And it can just be difficult sometimes for our kids to feel like they'll ever measure up or they'll ever get it right. So we just have to be pretty careful, I think, when it comes to taking control. And letting go doesn't mean that you don't care. I think sometimes we're afraid, like if I let go of some of these things, that maybe I'm just laissez-faire or I don't care as a parent. Letting go doesn't mean that you don't care, all right? We don't want to be a pushover parent either. We don't want to be too far on the other end where we're friends with our kids. We're not parents. We want to find some balance right in the middle. So let's move on to rebellion. Rebellion is defined as opposition to the one who is in authority, an instance of defiance or an instance of resistance, okay? How many of you in your parenting, your kids, have ever had an instance where your kids have been defiant or resisted you? This is one where everybody should be 100%. I hope that this is 100%, not because I want it this way, but rebellion is in our nature, okay? It's in the sin nature. When you're born, I'm sorry, but you're not born holy. You're not born with God living inside of you. You're born with a sinful nature that wants to, the first word a kid learns is no. That's almost usually always the first word a kid will learn, no. Or you tell your kid that they can't do something, what that says to them is do the other thing that you said I can't do, right? It's almost like you're challenging me, you're testing me. Rebellion is in our nature. And before we get mad at our kids about that, remember that rebellion is in your nature. How many of you have ever had an instance when you have defied or resisted one who was in authority over you? This should probably be 100% as well. It's just a reality, okay? It lives in our hearts. And what I think we sometimes have to remember is when our kids start to rebel or do things that we don't want them to do, we need to remember that our struggle, this is in Ephesians 6, verse 12, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. Remember that your struggle is not against your teens, but it's against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So your battle's not against your teen, it's against Satan and his minions, all right? That's the reality. That's who we're fighting against. In fact, way back in the garden, the first thing that was said is Satan looked at Adam and Eve and said, did he really say that you can't eat from any tree in the garden? Would God really do that, like make something off limits? What kind of God is it that would do that? You know, the devil questioned God's authority in the very beginning, and so that's why we question authority, because the devil is working. He's the prince of this earth. And so it can be difficult when we're raising teens. They want to feel grown up. They want to have a voice. And sometimes it feels like they're just against you. But really, it's not the teens that are against us. I mean, they're against us, but it's the devil sometimes having his way. There's this quote, and maybe you have felt this way. There are times when parenthood seems nothing but feeding the mouth that bites you. You know, like, it just feels like that as parents sometimes. Like, it's like, man, like I do all these things and this is what I get out of it. And that's the reality of this struggle. It's just we're struggle against all of the forces of darkness and the forces of evil in the heavenly places. All right, so I'm going to give you 5 reasons why your teen is rebelling. I think you have blanks for this in there. The first is that your teenagers rebel because they're struggling for identity. Struggle for identity, okay? Your teen is trying to answer the question, who am I? So during the teen years, your children are going to struggle to figure out who they really are and why they are here. And so in this struggle for identity, it's important during this time for you as a parent to help your child understand that they have immeasurable value for who they are, not just what they do, okay? They have immeasurable value because of who they are, not for what they do. So as a parent, when my kid is struggling to figure out who in the world that they are, and they go to school every day and they feel like they got to be this to fit in with this group, or they got to be this to fit in here, like our kids are constantly trying to fit in, I need to remind them of what I see in them, like acknowledging their natural abilities, like what they're good at, valuing their uniqueness, that each one of them are so unique. All of your kids are unique, noticing that uniqueness and highlighting the gifts that you see in them, reminding them of who they are in Christ. That's our job as parents, because the world is not doing that. The world is not saying, be unique, be who you are, be different. The world is saying, be the same, fit in. And what we have to do as parents is to remind them that who they are to God is really what matters. Like, you don't have to just do things to make mom or dad look good. Our ultimate goal is to honor God, so encourage them in that way. The second reason that our teens rebel is a struggle for acceptance. Struggle for acceptance. Do you guys remember trying to be cool in order to fit in? Anybody ever remember when you were young doing that? Again, I know that we get older and we kind of forget this, but when I remember that, like that's all I ever did growing up is I wanted to be accepted and I wanted attention, which will be the next answer. But it's the same today. They want to be a part of a crowd. They want a sense of belonging. They feel pressure to do what everyone else is doing. Anybody ever seen the movie What a Girl Wants? Anybody ever seen that movie? And only me, yeah. What a Girl Wants. In there, Daphne, who's a teenage girl, Daphne is trying to be someone she's not, and she's really struggling with that. And at one point in the movie, her boyfriend actually looks at her and asks, why are you trying so hard to fit in when you were born to stand out? And I think, I have to encourage my kids of that, because they want to fit in, but I want them to stand out. I want them to be unique. I want them to be different. And so I understand that they have a need for acceptance, but I want them to understand it's actually good to be different. It really is good to be different. Encourage them to be different, to have the courage to do what's right and the conviction to stand out. Again, as a parent, point out the positive traits that you see in your kids. Help them through this struggle for acceptance. The third one is a struggle for attention. Struggle for attention. Teens want people to notice them. As adults, sometimes we want to be noticed. And our kids are saying, look at me. When I was growing up, man, I spent all of my teenage years trying to look good for the adults in my life, trying to please those who are in authority over me. I know that not all kids are that way, but for me, that was a big deal. I wanted to be seen as someone who was very talented and very bright and very smart and very athletic. I wanted attention. That was a big deal. I wanted to say, look at me. And I would do almost anything for attention. And I think as parents, we need to do everything we can to give our kids attention that they need by being available to them when they need us. And the frustrating things about this, sometimes as a parent, you may find this out, the times when your kids need you the most, when they'll actually let you in, are often the times that are the most inconvenient for you. Does anybody ever notice that? You know, like it's like 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and that's when our kids have all this energy, and that's when they come to us, and that's when they want to sit down and have a late night conversation or a late night talk, and we're ready to be in bed 2 hours ago. Or it just seems that they come to us when work gets so overwhelming and so busy and there's just so much going on. Our kids will come to us at a time and it doesn't feel like it's the right time or the right place, but I want to challenge us that if we don't give them that attention, they will find someone who will give them that attention. I think it's why it's so important as a dad to be a dad that is often giving attention to your daughters and your sons, reminding your daughters they're beautiful inside and out. You are beautiful inside and out, and reminding your sons that they've got what it takes to make it in the world. Just being that parent who's there and the attention that they want, we give them good attention, positive attention. The next one is struggle for control. When our children are younger, we're in complete control of just about everything they do, right? I mean, when your kids are 1, 2, 3 years old, you control what they eat, you control what they wear, and unfortunately, sometimes you see what parents are dressing, you're like, man, you're really going to, but we dress them the way we want them to dress. It might be bows, it might be frills, whatever it might be. Where they go, who they're with, we control everything when our kids are little. And then as they get older, our children want to make more and more decisions. They don't want mom and dad to decide for them. They don't want mom and dad to tell them what to do. And so we need to show our children that they will have more control over their decision making to the extent that we can trust them to make wise decisions. So I want to give you decision making. I want to give you freedom to make these choices, but it's only to the extent that I can trust you to make wise decisions. And actually, trust is learned over time. It's not overnight. I also think it's important to tell our kids that if they do fail and they do mess up, that actually we can actually regain or rebuild trust with them. Like they don't have to feel like they never are going to have responsibility ever again. I remember being younger and I was on a youth group trip and I had a girlfriend at the time and we made a poor choice. And on the way home from the missions trip, I was in the back seat of the van. There was a 15-passenger van. The back seat was out. And I was laying behind the van, the back seat of the van, with my girlfriend, which was not a good position to put ourselves in, obviously. But I had actually just before that broke up with another girl a few months before that, and she was on the trip. And so we stopped, and Michelle was not a part of any of this. This was before her. But on the way back from the missions trip, we stopped at a gas station, and this girl that I had broken up with before, she was still very frustrated, very mad at me. She saw me in the back of the van with this girl, and we were just laying down. Nothing was going on. But she said that I had my pants off and that this girl had her shirt off in the back. She went to the youth pastor and said there were things going on in the back of the van that should not have happened. Again, none of that was going on, but I got home from the trip, and first thing my youth pastor does is comes to my house, knocks on the door. I'm like, why is he here? And he just, as a youth pastor, needed to express to my parents what was told to him and why it happened or what had happened. And my parent, like I felt like from that day forward for like the next 3 years, there was nothing I could do to get any of that trust back. And I remember telling my parent, like, seriously? Like, this didn't even happen for one, and how's it possible that I made that one poor decision, and 3 years later I feel like I'm still accountable for that? I think I needed to understand that our consequences do have long-lasting consequences, but I also feel like our kids have to know that you can mess up, you can fail, you can make a poor choice, and I can rebuild trust with you. You can earn some of that favor back. Our kids need to know that that can happen. So anyway, trust is earned over time, but trust ought to be able to be rebuilt as well. And then the final thing of why a teen rebels is a struggle for freedom. Your teen wants total freedom, and you are in the way. Right? I mean, that's the reality. Your teenager wants total freedom, and you are sometimes in the way. Your teens have probably said, I just want freedom. That's all I want. I just want some freedom. But just know this, that when they ask you for freedom and independence, they still want to and need to rely upon you for certain things. Money, for one. A place to sleep, a home, right? So they're going to ask for freedom, but we need to help them to understand that with freedom comes what? Responsibility. And they're going to hate you for saying that, but freedom comes with responsibility. The more that we are responsible, the better off we will be. And I think as parents, one of the main things we need to do is develop a relationship of trust with our kids, a relationship where you're communicating often, and if your kids can trust that they can communicate with you and they can speak to you and share things with you, and you keep that line of communication open, that's really the ultimate goal. Is we want to give our kids freedom, but we also want them to learn responsibility, okay? So those are the 5 reasons why your teen is rebelling, in addition to all I gave you last week, like hormones, lack of brain development, peer pressure. Put all those things together, that's why our teen is doing what they're doing. So as a result, when our kids are doing all of these things, they're wanting to rebel, they've got all this going on inside them, how do you respond? How do we respond as parents? There's about 4 different styles, and again, I said I added a 5th, so you have to write this down. But there's 4 main parenting styles on how we deal with our kids when they rebel. One is you might have an uninvolved parent. Uninvolved parents neglect their child by putting their own life before their child's. They do provide many times for a child's basic needs, but they show little interaction or little interest in the child. Some of you, when you look back to your childhood, you may have said, I had parents who were pretty uninvolved. They pretty much just let me do what I wanted to do. As long as I weren't hurting or harming someone, they pretty much do whatever you want to do. I didn't see them a lot. It was kind of laissez-faire, a little bit of hands-off kind of thing. Obviously, we're going to acknowledge that this is probably not the way we want to parent. We don't want to be uninvolved, where we have no interaction with our kids and no relationship with our kids. Also, some choose this permissive style of parenting. This is parents who take on the role of friend rather than parents. We've all probably seen this or maybe grown up with this. We're more friends than we are parents. We don't have any expectations of the child. We allow the child to always make their own decisions. It's just basically, I don't want to make my kids mad because I want my kids to like me. So I'm just going to kind of let them have whatever they want. Have any of us seen kids who are from permissive families? It's not a good thing, okay? They tend to be a little bit entitled. Get whatever they want, whenever they want it. So we got to be careful not to be permissive parents. This, I think, is one where, for whatever reason, I think most of us would acknowledge an uninvolved parent and a parent who lets our kids do whatever they want, whenever they want. We will often say, I understand why that is bad. This is one that I feel like a lot of parents are like, what is wrong with this? Like, what's wrong with an authoritarian parenting style? This is kind of like a militant parenting style. It's very strict, high expectations from parents, but little communication between child and parents. Like, this is the way it's going to be, and you will listen to me, and you will jump when I say jump, and this is how we do it around here. Parents don't provide a lot of reasons for the rules. It's because I said so, and this is just what's going to be best for you, and you just need to trust me on it. But there's not a lot of logical reasoning for rules and limits, and a lot of times it's harsh punishment too. In an authoritarian home, there's very harsh punishments. I think we need to be careful with all of these styles, because all of these I don't think are the style that God intends us to have with our kids. The one that I would say, and then I'll do I put the helicopter as number 5, but authoritative is the 4th style of parent. I think this is kind of where we want to be with our kids. And this role is more of a democratic style of parenting where parents are attentive, parents are forgiving, they teach their kids proper behavior, they have a set of rules, and if a child fails to follow those rules, there's punishment. And often, sometimes if those rules are followed, we give reinforcement. We may even praise them for honoring God with their actions, but the authoritative is a little bit more democratic than the authoritarian, but there's more structure, but a little bit more communication as well. And then we have the over-involved helicopter parents. Like I said, these are parents who they know their kids' daily schedule in and out. They know every bit of their child's grades on every single test because they're going online to find out what that might be, and then letting their kids know that they know every single grade that they're getting. They jump into they'll jump into a conflict for their kids, like their kids having an issue at school, and they'll actually handle the conflict for their kids because that kid is a pain in the butt and just needs to be put in their place. Actually, I've done this a few times in my life, so I'm not innocent on that. But preventing them from making mistakes, sometimes a helicopter or over-involved parent, we're so involved that our kids don't even have an opportunity to make a mistake because they're always with us, and as long as we're with them, they can't mess up or make a mistake. We rescue them. Helicopter parents are often rescuing their kids from the consequences of their actions. And this can just be a really bad, overprotective kind of thing. You know what reminds me of this helicopter parent? Are you guys familiar with the college admissions scandals recently? That's a helicopter parent, all right? I mean, just like, we're going to do everything I can to make sure that my kids get in and make sure my kids succeed. And even if they don't even do it the right way or they haven't done anything to deserve it, I'll pay who I need to pay. My kid just needs to have this education, and they need to have a degree from this university or whatever else that might be. So I would just say on these parenting styles, I don't know what you guys have seen, but I really think we want to be a little bit more in that authoritative area where there is rules, there is structure, there is discipline, but our kids actually have some say in that as well. Where, curfews, for example, this might be, as a kid, I never had any say in curfew. Even if we were at a good place and it was a healthy environment, and I called my mom and said, hey, I know my curfew's at 10 o'clock, but here's what I'm doing, and here's who I'm with, and this person's mom, would you talk to them? Like the mom, they'll tell you what I'm doing, but could I just stay for like a half an hour or 45 more minutes? I'm always home on time. I never missed curfew. It just would have been nice for me to be able to have a little bit of like say in that whole thing, and I never really had that. So I think an authoritative structure might allow for that to happen. So I say that we need to lead with authority. Lead with authority is, I think, what we really want to do. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So I want to lead you, I want to guide you, but as I do so, it will bring you joy. It is comforting. It's a kind of style where our kids know that we want the best for them. They may not like it when we kind of tug a little bit, kind of like the shepherd when he'd pull on those sheep. They didn't always like it, but it was good for them. And so our rod and our staff ought to comfort our kids. Our kids want discipline. I know you don't think they do. They want structure. They want guidance. They don't want total chaos. They don't want you to be uninvolved. They do want that. They just don't let you know it. They want to fight against it sometimes, okay? Josh McDowell made this statement, and I think it's good for us to remember as parents, that rules without relationship will lead to rebellion. Rules without relationship will lead to rebellion. So I think we always want to be in relationship with our kids, having those conversations, letting them know why we're doing what we're doing. And hopefully when we do that, they'll respect us for it. Okay? Let's talk about boundaries. The book I gave you guys last week, I gave you a couple book options. This boundary book by Cloud and Townsend, and actually specifically Boundaries with Teens, is written by John Townsend. It's a great book to get. A lot of the principles that I'm going to share with you tonight come from that book, and I found it to be really helpful. But a boundary is basically, there's lots of books on boundaries. Boundaries in marriage, just regular boundaries. If you guys have not read Boundaries, this is a foundational book I think that all of us ought to read, because we all have people in our lives that we have to learn to say no to, right? Some of you, it's your mom. Some of you, it's your dad. Some of you, it's your brother or your sister, where you're just like, every time I'm with them, I feel like harm is done to me. Like, I just know, even though I love them and that's my family, I have to put some boundaries in place, because if I don't, it's going to be harmful to me, and it's probably going to be harmful to them at some point, because I'm going to do something that I really regret. The whole idea of boundaries is that God actually lets us know in his word that boundaries is actually a good thing. And when you have all of you at home, you probably have, if you don't have a gate in your backyard, you have a door, right? And on your door, now when I was a kid, we didn't use locks on the door all the time, but most of you probably have a front door, right? And you have a lock on that front door. I mean, why do you lock your front door? Why do you do that? To keep what? To keep people out, okay? We have a door lock to keep people out. We have a gate on the fence to keep, it could be animals out, because we know that some of what's coming in from the outside is going to be harmful to us, okay? But we also have the unlock on the door, and the door that opens, so that if there's people that come over and it's good and it's healthy, we let them in, right? You're welcome to come in. This is good. This is safe. Unfortunately, it's really difficult when the people that hurt us and harm us the most are the people who are supposed to be safe. You know, like our mom comes over and it's like, I need to lock the door. I can't let her in. You know, or our mother-in-law comes over and it's like, oh, you know, I know we laugh about this kind of thing, but a boundary defies yourself. It says who you are and who you are not. It sets limits. It establishes consequences if people are attempting to control you or do things to you that are harmful. That's what a boundary is good. It says no to someone's bad behavior. That's why I have a boundary in place. So boundaries are good for you, and boundaries are good for another person. It keeps the bad out, and it lets the good in. So I want to relate that to your relationship with your teens. Actually, boundaries are really, really helpful when it comes to your teens. And I'll use the example of a tree trunk. This is where I think if you can picture it in this way, this is really what you want to do as a parent. As your kids are getting older, when they're like little saplings, your kids aren't saplings, but the tree's a little sapling, or when your kid's a little young, we have some of these stakes in place where we're tied a little bit, like when you're doing a tree, they start out at weak saplings. They need to be tied to a stake because they couldn't yet handle their own weight, all right? So they'll get blown over, winds come, trees can get destroyed pretty easy, so we put these stakes in place to keep a good structure to them so they can become strong, and then eventually the tree will mature over time, right? And then a little sapling like this might eventually look like this. And it happens over time, and it happens over a long period of time. But the same way, I think as parents, you're like the stake that provides structure to your kids as they're growing up. So when they're little, we put a lot of structure in place. We put a lot of boundaries in place. And as they get older, hopefully what will happen is they will be able to stand on their own a little bit more. When they become an adult in the world, they're not staked to us anymore. They're kind of out there on their own. They're doing their thing. And so as parents of teenagers, you're starting to loosen those stakes a little bit, give a little bit more freedom, give a little bit more responsibility. And the goal is to transfer our parenting of our kids to God. We parent our kids towards responsibility, not obedience. If in the end all you did was raise an obedient child, I think you're going to be disappointed. If in the end, as your kids graduate and they're 18, 19, and 20, and if you can say, I raised a responsible child, that's much better than an obedient child, okay? It's much better that way. You could have a kid that obeyed you your whole life, but they get out into the world, they don't know how to manage money. They don't know how to wash their clothes. They don't know how to make a grilled cheese sandwich. They don't know how to make a decision for themselves. We want to grow our kids towards responsibility, not just obedience, okay? So as you set boundaries with your kids, I would say there's 4 anchors. Actually, Townsend would say there's 4 anchors, and I would agree with him. The first one is love, okay? Love. You want your kids to know that you are on their side. I am on your side. Convey to them that you care about them and that you have their best interest in mind. Unless you don't have their best interest in mind, then don't lie to them. But I would imagine most of you in here truly have your kids' best interests in mind. You love them and you care about them. And love helps them to see the behavior is not the problem, or the behavior is the problem, not an angry or out of control parent. So I do love you. I am on your side. I am not an angry and out of control parent right now, but I want you to understand that the behavior that you're exhibiting is not a good thing. It's not healthy. This is not going to be good for you moving forward if you continue to live this way and act this way. So I know that I am on your side, first and foremost, but the truth is that I have some rules and requirements for your behavior, all right? Your teen needs to know what the line is so they can choose whether or not they want to cross it. That's not why you make a rule, so that your kid can choose whether they want to cross it. But when you give them the line, they'll make that decision. Okay, do I want to cross this or do I not want to cross it? If there's no boundary or if there's no line, then you can't blame your teen for crossing over a line or a boundary that wasn't there, right? So they need to know what the boundaries are. They need to know that there are some rules and there are some requirements for your for your behavior. And why am I doing this? Because I love you, okay? Why did God create rules and boundaries? Why did he say don't eat from the other tree? He wanted what was best for them. He wanted them to know that he loved them, but there would be some rules and requirements. The third thing that we have to understand is that you can choose, you tell our kids, you can choose to accept or reject these rules. I recognize that you have a choice. You have the ability to choose whether you want to accept the rule, respect it, or reject it. I can't make you choose the right thing. It's your choice. Freedom to choose poorly is necessary in order to learn to choose well, I think. When we give our kids the freedom to choose poorly or make a poor decision, that's necessary in order for them to learn to choose well. Now, freedom does have a limit, I think. If a problem is life-threatening or a problem is like dangerous or life-threatening, then obviously we need to intervene. Okay, you can't just say, well, I'm just going to give you freedom. It looks like you're going to kill yourself, but you have freedom. No, we don't do that. If there's something that's happening where your kids are in a dangerous position or it looks like they could harm themselves or harm someone else, then absolutely you intervene. You don't say, well, I've given you freedom and it looks like you're making a poor choice. That would be reckless as a parent to do that. But in general, I'll let them know that they have the freedom to choose or reject some of the rules that you are making. But there will be a reality. And this is the consequences. Here's what will happen if you reject these rules. There's consequences for poor choices. It's the law of sowing and reaping. You reap what you sow. Good behavior brings good results, and bad behavior brings uncomfortable results, okay? So we want there to be the reality that this is what will happen if you choose to reject. Consequences ought to be, if you guys have consequences for behavior, if any of us have consequences, they ought to be clearly communicated. They ought to be said and done. They should be clearly communicated, and then after we've clearly communicated it, there should be follow-through, or there should be a consequence, okay? So not only do I communicate it, but when the behavior happens, you follow through on the consequence for that behavior. And sometimes you can involve your teen in the rules, and sometimes you can involve them in the consequences. Sometimes you won't be able to do that, but sometimes you will as well. All right. 3 rules of life. 3 rules of life. Number 1, it's kind of the synopsis of what we talked about here. Your teenager will live or die by his or her own choices. That's 1 rule. Number 2, your teenager has the right to choose smart or stupid. And rule number 3 is that it's your job to make your teenager's life a little miserable when he or she chooses stupid, okay? So these are just some realities, I think, as parents that we want to remember and to remind our kids. You're going to live or die by the choices you make. You have a right to choose smart or stupid. God gave us the freedom to choose. But as a parent, it's my job to make sure that your life's a little miserable if you choose stupid. And why do I do this? Like, why do I do this? Why do we discipline? Why do we have consequences? Why do we sometimes make our kids mad by what we decide? It goes along with this idea, and then I'll go back. The reason for rules is really to keep safety in and chaos out. It's the whole boundary idea, right? I have rules for you. I have expectations for you because I want to keep safety in. I want you to be protected from danger or damage, like physical, emotional, spiritual. I want you to be protected and to keep chaos out. All right? I don't want chaos. I want there to be safety. All right? So I'm doing this to protect and to preserve order. That's why we're doing what we're doing. So this is kind of, as your kids get older, this is kind of what I want us to understand in regards to how rules look as our kids get kind of later on in those teenage years. A lot of where you'll begin with kids is there will be, rules will be the first thing. You'll be a voice of authority in their life. You'll have kind of total control. So when your kids are little, right, like I told you, here's what you're going to wear, here's what you're going to eat, here's what you're going to do, here's when you're going to go to bed, your bedtime's 8 o'clock, your bedtime's 8:20, your bedtime's 8:30. Like, we make we're the total authority, we have rules, total control. And then as our kids get older, some of those where we're telling them everything to do, some of that turns into advice, wise counsel, firm guidance. I think that this would be best for you. Here's why I think that this would be best for you. But you know what? You're 17 years old right now, and your bedtime is not going to be 9 o'clock every night. Like, you're going to have a little bit of authority to decide when you want to go to bed. Now, I think it would be wise for you to not stay up until 2 in the morning. That would be my advice. I don't think you're going to be very good the next day in school. I don't think you're going to get a lot accomplished real well if you're staying up that late. But it's moving a little bit more towards advice. You're not controlling everything your kids do, whether you like it or not. You can pretend you are in control of everything, but you're not. Your kids are sometimes doing things without you even knowing it, unfortunately. Sorry to tell you that. But move to advice, wise counsel, firm guidance, and then later on when your kids are like two of my kids' ages now, we're moving a little bit to some of the suggestions, good ideas, carrying emancipation. All right, like, I know you're kind of out there, you're going to be living on your own, you're kind of doing your own thing, but you know what, you're still living with me, so we're still going to have some rules, we're still going to have some structure, but I know that I'm not controlling everything that you're doing, and so we're moving a little bit from total control to giving advice, giving suggestions, and that's what we want to get to in regards to that, okay? All right. Any questions about this? I know we're kind of going through a lot tonight. Yeah. No, I mean, there's no exact time frame. I mean, this should be happening in that kind of 12 to 13 through 18 thing a lot. I think some of it depends upon our kids too. Like, some kids, this works a little bit better with. Other kids, the rules are gonna have to be, the structure is gonna have to be there longer because they're gonna choose to fight you a lot more. I don't know which kid it will be, but some of us, our kids, when we move from rules to advice to suggestions, we see that it goes really well. But sometimes there's a kid who's 13, 14, and he's just reckless in his behavior, choosing poorly all the time. We try to give a little bit of freedom, and they're just not doing well, and so we're going to have a little bit more structure. I don't know that there's an exact time frame. It's going to depend on the kid, But all I do know is that when our kids do get out of the house, I'm not going to be able to control anything that if they're off on I have a daughter on a college campus right now. That's pretty scary. Any of you guys have kids on a college campus? It's not the greatest thought in the world all the time, is it? Because whether we like it or not, I have no control over anything that Aubrey is doing on that campus. None. So if all I ever did was tell her, go to bed at this time, do this, do this, do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and then she goes off on her own, that's not going to go really well. So I want to somehow give her the opportunity or the way of thinking through her decisions. Let's talk, let's have conversations, let's talk about why this is good, why this might not be good, and then just hope that when she goes out there and lives on her own, that she's going to actually implement some of the wise counsel, the firm guidance, the good ideas, the suggestions. But unfortunately, I can't control. I can't control that. But I do want her to learn to process well. So, any other comments about that? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You leading them? Like, does it wear off in regards to does it matter anymore? Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of that probably depends on the kid as well. I think if we ask our kids to be honest, that leading by influence and showing the example is something that a kid will always respect, whether they let you know that or not. I really do. I mean, I think if they see you modeling, like we talked about last week, modeling forgiveness and what that looks like, that's going to be something that whether they acknowledge that to you or not, those are the things that they're going to remember. Even faith stuff, conversations you have about faith, I think they're listening. I mean, statistics show this isn't a real encouraging thing, but we're about 50 to 70% now. The statistics are kids, when they leave home, they'll leave the church. That's what the figures are showing, like 50 to 60% of our kids, when they leave, they're leaving the church. Now, the positive thing is, most statistics will show that a quarter of those will come back when they're old. I don't know how old. A lot of times it's when they have their own kids. When we have our kids, we want the best for our kids. So a lot of times they'll come back in that way. But I do think all I can say is that I believe that the model and the example that you show, that our kids are watching those things, we're seeing those things, and eventually, I don't know when it will be, but eventually at some point, they'll come back and they'll let you know that they appreciated those things that you showed them. Some of it they may even implement with their own kids down the road. I got to the point when I was 20, probably, most of you guys were probably like this, when we get to be about 22 or 23 and we're in college and we're off on our own, in my mind sometimes I started thinking, man, all that stuff that I was mad at my parents for doing, that made sense now. I mean, did any of you guys ever remember having those thoughts? Like, not all of it, but I had to start going home occasionally and saying, Mom, I just appreciate all that you did and all that you and Dad showed me. I never told you that when I was at home because, to be quite honest, I didn't want you to know that I liked you. And many times I didn't like you. But when you get a little bit older and you look back, I mean, I look back and I'm like, am I frustrated by some of the things my mom did and the ways that the rules? Am I frustrated? Was I? Yes. But man, when I turned 22, 23, I started realizing why she did what she, and that's when it's like God begins to reveal to you some things about how hard you were and how difficult you were as a teenager, and that you need to think back and recognize why your parents did what they did. Like, I started to realize, why did my mom have all the rules? Why was she that strict? It's because of what she dealt with growing up, and there was no structure, and there was no love, and she wasn't going to let that be repeated for me. So I would have never told her that at 14, 15, or 16, but man, 22, 23, I'm like, thank you, Mom, so much for providing that structure, that consistency. Thank you for having rules. I hated almost all of them, but thank you for that. Thank you for caring enough to have the rules. Thank you for trying to protect me. Thank you for trying to keep safety in and chaos out. So, I don't know. That's a long answer to your question, but I think that modeling is always worth it. And I think they do notice. They just won't ever tell you, usually when they're at home. So hopefully the next year or two, Amy, when Devin comes home, he'll start telling you those things, right? Yeah. Hopefully we all have those times when our kids come back, okay? A couple more things. And then at the end of, after I share these few things, I've got a couple examples in the book, parenting lab kind of stuff. I'd like us around our tables. There's some scenarios. I'd like to close by kind of having you walk through a few of those scenarios and what you would do. We all might be a little different on this, but walk through a few of these as we close tonight. So let's go to some principles of writing rules or having rules in your home. A few principles. Number one, have as few rules as possible. I know that this, maybe you don't like this idea, but the more rules you make, the more time you have to spend on the law enforcement side of parenting. Sometimes I'm realizing that the more rules that I have, it's actually a pain in the butt for me too, okay? Like, that was our tendency a little when kids were younger to have a little bit more rules, and I'm like, man, the more, like, if you do this, then this will happen. Like, I was the one that had to supersede or superintend some of those things of the consequences. And I'm like, I'm creating a lot of rules and a lot of consequences, and I don't want to be in charge of all of these things. So there's a few reasons why you want to have a few rules. One of them is that. The other one is, again, more rules doesn't make your kids want to obey you more. Like, because you have 80 rules doesn't mean that it actually is going to probably put a little bit of this between you and your kids, the more rules that you have. Michelle and I haven't had a lot of rules, okay? Now, again, some of this depends on the kids, and some kids require more than others, but we've kind of had as few rules as possible, and some of those are the reasons why. The second is make the rule, when you do have a rule, make it specific and make it quantitative, all right? So the vaguer the rule, the more wiggle room there will be for your teenager to wiggle out, okay? So the rule needs to, whatever your rule is, it needs to be a specific rule and a quantitative rule. Sometimes as parents, I think we don't like specific and quantitative either, because we can manipulate better if it's not specific. Like, if we're not given the specifics, then we can kind of do whatever we want, kind of assess the situation, what's working and what's not working. So it can keep our manipulative tendencies in check as parents, I think, as well. But we do need to make rules specific, quantitative, measurable, be clear, and be purposeful about your rules and about your expectations and about your desires, okay? Number three, if you're going to have a rule, make sure that you're able to enforce the rule. So the consequences for breaking the rule should be clear, but you actually ought to be able to enforce whatever the rule is that you're doing. So you can't say, okay, every time you break this rule, you owe me $1,000, okay? Obviously, that's extreme. But whatever your rule is going to be, you have to be able to enforce the rule. Ask yourself, this is, I think, a tool that we have to use as parents when our kids are toddlers, and then again with their teenagers. Is this a hill worth dying on? Is this, choose your battles, is this a battle that I'm going to fight? If you as a parent battle everything, you're going to get wore out, and your kids are going to get wore out. All right, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, is the rule worth all the effort, fight, or confrontation? If not, sometimes give advice. Now, I mentioned the room thing. I think the messy room is a good example of this, all right? I have a daughter who is a total slob. I shouldn't say total slob, because sometimes the room has some order to it. But for the most part, from the time she's been little, and some of you have kids like this, the room is just total chaos. Now, I remember as a kid, I felt like it was a respectful thing to have your room be clean. I just kind of feel that way. But I also know that a lot of times our kids don't want us to be in imagine, kind of look at this like a state or a province kind of idea. So our kids we have to be careful not to invade too many territories of our kids, is what I'm going to say, okay? Like as parents, we want to invade their music world, their TV world, and next week I'm going to give you some ways to kind of work through music choices for your kids. But we as parents want to invade the music world of our kids, the TV world, the school world, the homework world, the clothing world, the friends world, the dirty room world. Like, we have to be careful, I think, sometimes not to invade too many territories. And as parents, Michelle and I just said, the messy room thing, as much as I hate it, that's not a hill we're going to die on. And so what we decided to do is, because we felt like we wanted to teach some kind of order, and we actually wanted to help her husband someday. Like, we did. We really do. Like, so we compromised, and we said, okay, we're not going to battle this dirty room every day of the week, okay? If she wants to have a messy room and total chaos, like I said, if we have an exterminator come in, they're going to pay the fee for that. But in general, if you're going to have a messy room, just do what? Just close the door. I don't want to see it. Close the door, okay? Monday through Friday, you want a chaotic room, you got a chaotic room. Saturday, though, was cleaning day, and it was a family cleaning day, and we all had responsibilities and chores. And part of the chores was clean your room, okay? Even as a teenager, pick it up. Now, it may not have to be the perfection that we required when they were younger, but this is, as a family, we value this, and we're all going to participate in this, so we're not just asking you to do something we're not doing. And so that's how we found a way to deal with the messy room kind of thing. We looked at some of the ways that I'll process through, or Michelle and I will process through. Is this rule necessary to protect someone, or is this rule necessary to preserve order? And we felt like the messy room, it's not really hurting or harming anyone. It's not creating chaos. It's chaos in their room. It's not creating chaos for the entire family. So that's a battle that we weren't willing to fight. So some of the time, I think we just have to ask ourselves, are you guys going to die on every hill? Are you going to make everything a battle? If you do, it's probably going to become a struggle at some point, okay? Be sure your motive for doing it is a good one. Remember, your goal as a parent is to make it ouch a bit when your teenager chooses stupid, not to control them or make them turn out right. All right? So if your goal in creating the rules is to create a good, perfect, obedient kid so that the Jester name will be upheld in a healthy way, and the whole world will look at Troy Jester and Michelle Jester and say, what wonderful kids you have. They are so obedient. And if that is my goal, it's the wrong motive, okay? Would I like it if people will say that about my kids? Yes, okay? Did I like it when we went into a restaurant and against all odds, because they never did this at home, but when we went to a restaurant, they tended to behave themselves pretty well, and someone would come over and say, man, your kids are so well behaved. Yeah, I did. We enjoyed that. That was good to hear. But if our goal was that everyone would look at us and say how perfect our family is, it's the wrong motive. So just make sure when you have a rule, the motive is a good one, not to control him or her or make them turn out right, but actually to teach responsibility and to be helpful to something. Maybe it's a future husband, a future wife, whatever. You're helping with that. Number 6, realize that some rules actually will morph into advice when they get older. So mentor, as a parent of a teenager, here's what I would like all of us to be. Mentors, okay? Teachers, encouragers. Like, these are some of the things that it would be good for you to be as a parent of your teenager: a mentor, a teacher, an encourager, not a policeman. Not a policeman that's like gonna enforce every rule and, oh, you were speeding, we want to teach and encourage and mentor. Sometimes we will have to be the bad guy. I'm not saying we'll never have to do that, but let's focus on teaching, encouraging, mentoring. And then number 7, some of the rules that you make as parents are going to need to be reviewed, updated, or sometimes even dumped depending on the age of the kid. So keep your rules clear and keep them current. For example, when our kids were little, you might have a rule like no putting oatmeal in the VCR, okay? Like when your kid, the little and they want to like do stuff like that, it's like, nope, we don't, this is breakfast, we don't put oatmeal in the VCR. You're probably going to be able to update that rule when your kid is 14 or 15. We're probably not going to have to worry about the oatmeal in the VCR kind of thing, but we do need to just review our rules, update our rules. Are they working? Some rules might need to be dumped, so just think about that. How do we determine appropriate consequences? How do you determine appropriate consequences? Number one, remove the desirable or add the undesirable. And I believe that removing something a teen wants is usually more effective than adding something that she doesn't want due to their lack of time and you needing to supervise whatever you add. All right? So remove the desirable or add the undesirable, but I think sometimes removing is usually more effective. It stinks that we have cell phones in this world in many different ways, but man, that has become a great tool to take away. Seriously, the fact that we have that, I think my mom tried to always wonder, what in the world can I take away from him? He doesn't have anything. And honestly, the best thing my mom could do for me is put me in a room with no people and close the door and make me stay in there for an hour. Like, that was the worst punishment in the world. I was like, Mom, beat me. Like, she hit me with meat tenderizers, metal spoon. I'm like, spank me. Do that all you want. It hurts, it ouches for a minute, but then it's over, She learned after a while that the best thing she could do to me is actually put me in a place where I'm alone and I have no people and no interaction, and that worked best. But you do need to sometimes remove the desirable from your teens. That's always a good consequence. Don't interfere with natural consequences. Okay? Don't interfere with natural consequences. Sometimes when our kids choose stupid, they may lose a relationship with a friend. Some of you have probably had that happen. I've had a daughter who's lost some relationships because of some of the ways that she's acted. Sometimes that's a natural consequence of the choices they make. Sometimes they're kicked off a sports team because they don't have good grades. And again, most parents will try to go in there because their big thing is, I want my kids to be successful in sports, so I'm going to do all I can to get them out of it. There are many parents who will do that, but sometimes that's a natural consequence of our choices. If you can't keep your grades up, you're not going to be able to be a part of the team. Let natural consequences happen sometimes, even if it hurts you as a parent. It's like, crap, I can't go watch them. I love watching sporting events, I know, but it's a natural consequence. You may have to miss watching that movie with your friends because you don't have any money, because you don't manage your money well. You spend it all the time. Mom, can I borrow the money to go to a movie? No, we've told you that we'll provide finances for you to do things like, whether it be a mission trip or basic needs or basic necessities, but any kind of additional things that you want to do, it's going to require that you use your money to do that. So if you don't know how to manage your money, I'm not going to keep giving you another $5 or $10 so you can go hang out with your friends. You need to sometimes not interfere with natural consequences, because it's not going to help them down the road if you do that. Number 3, make the consequence something that matters. Like I told you, I would try to get spanked so that I didn't have to be alone in a room. Make the consequence something that matters to your kids, and what matters to one kid isn't going to matter to the other one. So figure out what matters and make it matter. But I will say this, I think this is important. Don't punish your kids by removing good activities. I just think this always bothered me when I was a youth pastor, and we'd have youth group, and I'd have parents that would be, hey, my kid did this thing that they shouldn't have done. They didn't obey, so I told them they couldn't come to youth group. And I'm just like, really? Like, of all the things you can take away from them, you're going to take away youth group, which is a place where they might be learning some things or hearing some things that might actually help you as a parent, at least if there's a good youth pastor there that's doing that. So I do think you need to be careful. Now, some parents are like, that's the only thing that matters to my kid, and that's pretty cool if the only thing that matters to your kid is a youth group, and that's what they don't want to miss. That's what the parent would say. Nothing else matters, but if you take youth group away, it actually changes the behavior. And I'm just like, I'd still be very careful with taking things away that are actually very beneficial and helpful to them in their life. And again, you have phones, you have social media, you have technology. Start there. Don't start with taking youth group away from kids. And give the most lenient consequence that works. The most lenient consequence that works. Part of this is because if you start with a major, huge consequence, and that's where you start, where are you going to go from there? So sometimes you start with the most lenient consequence that will work, and then you can still turn up the heat if it needs to be turned up. So think about that. And then don't reward for doing what's normally required in life. I think as parents, we need to be careful not to reward things that we should expect. Good job, I'm going to give you a candy bar because you treated that authority in your life with respect. You said yes, ma'am, or you said yes, sir. Here's a candy bar for doing that. Don't reward for doing what is required in life, but when you do notice extra effort, like, man, you brought your grades up from like a C or a D to an A, like, I noticed that effort. I want to praise that effort. You've worked really hard to do that. I want to acknowledge that. Maybe we'll take you out for dinner or something like that. But don't reward them from doing what's normally required in life. The goal here, guys, ultimate goal, the whole point of tonight is we want to give our kids a sense of responsibility, a sense of accountability, and self-awareness. And if those things are happening, then I think that we're doing a good job as parents. You'll notice in your booklet, yeah, that's the end there. In your booklet, you'll notice there's a section that says Parenting Teens with Love and Logic. That's a good book by a guy named Foster Cline, and he just basically gives 4 steps to parent your teen with love and logic. Number 1, give your teen responsibility. Number 2, trust that your child will carry it out. Number 3, when she does blow it, stand back and allow the consequence to occur while expressing empathy. And then step 4, turn right back around and give her the same responsibility all over again, because it sends a powerful message. You're so smart that you can learn. People do learn from their mistakes, and you're no different. So again, there will be some difficult times as you try to do this, but just some of these things that I've tried to help you understand is there should be freedom within boundary lines. You should discipline, not only out of punishment, but for guidance, and discipline because you love. That's why you discipline, because we love you, and your kids won't believe you when you say that. Like my mother, when she would give me a spanking and say, I'm doing this because I love you. I'm like, really? A meat tenderizer on my rear end because you love me. But she's like, yeah, even the Lord disciplines those that he loves, and that's the reality, okay? And I will say, too, you're going to keep getting these bonus little things because they keep coming to mind, but it is really important as parents to be united when it comes to boundaries and discipline, even if you don't agree, because you will not always agree, okay? There's been many times, and there still are, where Michelle and I struggle because of our difference in opinions and the things that we ultimately want to accomplish with our kids and the way that we get to that, right? Like, we are not always on the same page. When it comes to what our kids are responsible for paying, for example, my mindset, and maybe it's because the mindset, sometimes we have the mindset we grew up with, and sometimes we see things that didn't work, so we try something different. My mindset is, I kind of think our girls ought to pay for a few more things. I kind of think they ought to have a job when they're a little bit younger. Our girls, pay for their gas for their car. They don't pay for their car insurance. We still pay for that. My tendency would be a little bit more make them pay for more things. Michelle's tendency is make them pay for less things. They don't really make that much money. And so we clash often on that. And so we have really had to try to find a compromise in some of these areas against sometimes my better interest, and maybe against her better interest sometimes. But I have some things that ultimately as a dad, it's like I want to see my girls have this when they get older. And I'm sure Michelle does too. They're just not always the same things. So you may not agree on money. School, this is another one Michelle and I struggled with. Christian school, secular school. I kind of wanted my kids to go to a secular school because I grew up in a Christian school, and my Christian school experience was people talk less about God in a Christian school than a secular school. That was my experience. Michelle grew up in a secular school and decided, based on what she saw in the secular school, she didn't want our kids in that kind of environment. We didn't agree. We never agreed until we made the decision. Not that we were mad at each other, but That one I lost. And honestly, I didn't say I lost it, but I chose as the man, like I made that decision as the man of the household. Michelle let me make that decision. She gave me all the reasons why she thought Christian education was a good thing, and many of them were good points. I gave all the reasons why I thought public education was a good thing. I thought they were good points too. We were never going to agree, and we made the decision to go with the way that she wanted. It's been a good thing for our kids, but I just know that you guys are going to struggle sometimes because you're not going to be on the same page when it comes to money or school or even discipline. Some parents are a little more forceful, some less forceful, responsibility, all that kind of things. But find a way to compromise and be united for the benefit of your kids, knowing that you are on the same page. So don't have a lot of arguments in front of your kids about that, because they're going to start taking sides. They're going to start being like, I can tell you who my girls would agree with when it comes to what they pay for. They're going to like Michelle's view on that way more. I know that. Like, I know that. I know that I would lose that battle. We don't have a lot of those arguments or discussions in front of them. And I don't even know if our girls know. They probably have figured that out. They know that Dad would rather them actually do more. But anyway, even if you're different, try to get on the same page. That's important. I've given you a family contract on the bottom of your thing, which is sometimes when you're trying to work through this can be a helpful thing. It involves writing a plan with expectations and consequences for behavior. So this is just an outline to follow. What's the issue? So it might be a lack of discipline with homework might be the issue. The reasonable expectation is that you complete homework in a timely manner. How can we hold you accountable? Daily homework check-in with one parent upon agreed upon time. What's the rewards for a job well done? Well, it could be things as simple as a sense of accomplishment, feeling good about yourself, college preparation.